Let me start by saying that the Devil May Cry series is far from perfect. It's unique, but not really groundbreaking. Dark, but also daft. There is a strange charm in its cliched action movie attitude and gothic mythology overtones, so I'm going to examine the series so far, excluding the recent reboot, and see what makes these games tick. Devil May Cry's story has never been its strongest point, but in the hope of exploring what the fuck is meant to be happening, but still seeing the game's progression, I'll start from the first game released, and keep this handy reminder around of the official story timeline, which goes 3, 1, 4, 2. So the protagonist Dante has always walked a tightrope between endearing smartass and annoying loudmouth, but thankfully in DMC1 he strikes a pretty good balance. In a nutshell, he is the son of a human mother and a demon father, the latter of whom is renowned for turning against his own kind and winning a war between demons and humans. The game starts with a demon called Trish falling out of the moon and breaking into Dante's home, to which his only response is,
"Whoa, slow down, babe."
However, we also see a more serious side to his character when faced with his main motivation of avenging his mother and brother, who were killed by this giant predator laser in the sky called Mundus. Speaking of Trish, there's a strange Freudian relationship between her and Dante, as she looks like his dead mother, and they end up pretty close. Not that things don't get weird anyway, as she convinces him to go to a demon-infested castle, then pisses off for most of the game. Betrays you, sacrifices herself, is resurrected somehow. I'm worried it might be something to do with demon tears. Redeems herself with this Dragon Ball Z shit, and finally invites herself into your business.
The world has the legendary Dark Knight Dante and his sidekick.
Fat chance, you crazy bitch. It's fucking weird and stupid, okay? But it only really matters around the start and end of the game. The main pull personally is Dante's revenge against Mundus, who is really effectively built up to be this all-powerful god prick who it's easy to hate by the end of the game. Discriminate against all humans, killing off his own minions without remorse, and causing Dante to unknowingly murder the brother he thought he was avenging. I mean, once you've played DMC3 and know Virgil's face, you think Dante would notice something's fishy at this point, but anyway. To be honest, it's more so the gameplay and atmosphere that draws you into the overall story, but for that to even work is impressive when you have writing and voice acting like this.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light.
I'm not sure what's worse, that he's got about 9 words too many to fit into a despair scream, the fact that his voice breaks, or the fact that they added a fucking echo. But as I say, the fact you can overlook most of the writing is a credit to the rest of the game, and besides, the worst is yet to come. One of the first things you might hear about this game is its difficulty. For a game released in 2001, it's pretty damn hard. Enemies respawn upon re-entering a room, they all have entire S&M fetishes to beat through before they die, and you have to pay for your bloody checkpoints. Yep, that's right, unless you've spent the game's currency of red orbs on a yellow orb, death means you're starting the whole level again. Devil May Cry 1 is one unforgiving bitch, but you can at least learn to save your collected red orbs up until that point, so after several failed attempts you can buy weapon upgrades or items. Assuming you save before you die. Another thing you may or may not have heard is that DMC1 was going to be made as a Resident Evil game, which suddenly brings a lot of similarities to light. No, not just the bad voice acting. I meant much of the game's tone and design, leading to one of the biggest issues with Devil May Cry 1, fixed camera angles. In a slow, methodical survival horror, they work a lot better. In the clusterfuck of combat that is DMC, they're infuriating. Even more so when the game throws in platforming sections. Yeah, thanks for the variety, but whose fucking perspective is this, the clouds? Moving on to one of DMC1's major strengths, however, is the combat. It's fast, fun, and naturally frustratingly difficult. There's also an impressive variety to the enemies, and regular attackers are less like fodder and more of an actual challenge, whilst the boss battles are often insanely difficult by today's standards, and require more strategy to defeat than mindless mashing. The first game brings back boss characters at least twice, and whilst this sounds like a cheap game lengthening tactic, the fact that these huge spider scorpions and griffins can talk gives the interactions a significance in the story, and the bosses actually end up some of the most memorable personalities in the game. Because of the aforementioned almost Resident Evil, DMC1 has a much stronger horror atmosphere than the other games, and despite playing as this legendary demon-human hybrid, you can feel quite intimidated by this gigantic gothic castle and its violent inhabitants. This becomes more evident with the game's transition from day to night, and the larger, more exterior levels that come with it. There's a fair amount of backtracking in the game, but the environments are pretty varied, with dungeons, sunset courtyards, moonlit gardens, and goddamn ghost ships. Then there's the final sections of the game situated in the demon world, which are appropriately alien and weird, filled with internal organs, creepy flesh doors, and demonic hieroglyph wallpaper. Or maybe that's Japanese. As for Mundus himself, you finally reach him in this unsettlingly holy white temple room, which comes after an onslaught of macabre underworld environments, so your expectations are kind of flipped as shit. He even appears as a godlike statue, and it isn't until the third time you kick his ass that he starts looking at all demonic. But to fully understand how DMC1 works, you have to see how Devil May Cry 2 really doesn't. No, they're not ready yet, there's too much shit. So you know how I just talked about the intimidating gothic architecture of the first game? DMC2 drags all that through a muddy puddle of shit. It starts with the minor changes, little things like taking away the magic double jump platform, or how Dante's Stinger charge attack is now a running lunge instead of the crazy floor slide it used to be. Even the orbs are noticeably smaller. It feels stupid to talk about realism in a game with giant demon gorillas, but it's what DMC2 seems to be trying to achieve. The derelict castle in DMC1 was exciting and tense because it felt like, and there was, magic and devilry literally hiding in the fucking walls. Now we're stuck in this abandoned city full of factories and facilities and sewers and ugh. If this is the world outside that castle, then let the demons have it, it's dull as shit. Here's DMC2's good points in list format. I suppose we might as well see what the alternate cost. Why the fuck did they need sponsoring? What happened to the money from DMC1? And why would they inflict it so blatantly on the main characters? What the fuck? Okay, so here's what I tried to understand of DMC2's story. This is the last game in the timeline. So Dante is older, wiser, and apparently unmoved by anything around him. Seriously, there is about 2 stupid quips in the game, and one of them is calling an old woman Granny. What happened between 4 and 2 to turn him into this cold, dead gun for hire? There's not even a trace of him mellowing out in 4. In fact, if anything, I'll get to that later. He's even started doing some pointless two-faced coin flipping bollocks to decide whether he takes a job or not. Spoiler, both sides are heads. Presumably this is to inject some fun into his life, because it's the only time he seems anything other than bored out of his mind. Which is ironic, considering that's how the players feel too. The premise of DMC2 is that Dante accepts a job from 2 women who once fought alongside his father in the demon-human war. Apparently. I mean, he just takes their word for it. The job is to take out an evil businessman who's not a demon, but has demonic powers and is trying to get more, or summon something, or... fuck. Even after you kill the guy, some ritual's been activated, so you go around opening the gate to the demon world, even though that sounds like the worst possible idea in this situation. But, you know, they must have thought it through. So you open a gate to the demon world, and then, oh no, a portal to the demon world has been opened, and that's totally unexpected now.
What?
Nothing is properly explained in this game. You randomly teleport to otherworldly planes, seemingly just to pad out the gameplay. You have this triple-headed freak who appears once and randomly talks about Dante's sins, which aren't mentioned before or after anywhere in the game.
Don't speak. Just die.
I wasn't even that motivated to kill Tekkenface, since humanity seems extinct at this point anyway. Now you may have noticed there's a second playable character in Devil May Cry 2. Let's judge the shit out of her. So the game introduces this character in the opening cutscene. She takes out some demon birds rather stylishly with these backwards arm swords thing, and throwing knives, then Dante naturally upstages her by going through the roof.
Till next time, son of Sparta.
Wait, what? Is that supposed to be French? She's got the pitch of Mickey Mouse and the delivery of Christopher Walken. Okay, so she's got a stupid voice, maybe we can overlook that. Now how do you kick off an action-packed first level with a new character? By breaking her neighbour's chimneys. You have to smash the chimneys to get enough red orbs so you can get through the door. So what's Lucia's motivation then? Well, she has to collect these artifacts called Arcanas to stop Tekkenface from becoming more powerful somehow. But then it turns out she's actually a demonic defect created by Tekkenface, and who fucking cares? I mean really, there's so little done to build these characters as likeable, and even if Lucia at least has some drama in her story, there's nothing done to really explore it in the brief cutscenes or the gameplay, which is almost all the same levels and bosses as Dante's story, except for an underwater level that isn't particularly fun due to the clumsy platforming and drunken camera angles. Not to mention that voice makes it incredibly hard to sympathise with her.
Who have the blood of the devils. But the truth is, I was created by Arius. I could become a monster and attack the humans at any time.
As for Dead Dreams Dante over here, his only motivation throughout the whole game is,
if you are successful, I will tell you a story about your father, son of Sparta.
and it turns out in the end he knew it anyway.
I know.
I think my favourite character in this mess is actually the villain Tekkenface, solely for the voice acting masterclass he delivers.
What? What's going on? Is there a problem? You! False god.
I think there's a deleted cutscene where Dante kicks his testicles into his lungs, because about halfway through the game his voice changes from this
Arcana.
to this.
Now I'll absorb his power. I will become an all-powerful immortal.
So arguably the biggest problem with DMC2 is the significantly toned down difficulty. I didn't have to use a gold orb, I don't know why they fucking changed it, more than once in the entire game. But it's not just that the game is easier, it's that it's slower too. In Devil May Cry 1 the guns did comparatively fuck all, even the grenade launcher, but you jackhammered the shit out of the button because every tiny hit counted, and you had no idea if an enemy was at death's door or had less scratches than a Skrillex final. It's funny because he uses a laptop unlike traditional DJs. Now the guns are more powerful and every enemy has its own health bar. Hardly any of them ever charge you, so you can just hang back and hold shoot until you run out of meters to deplete. Notice I said hold there. That's because there's now an auto-fire feature. I'll admit, it was a chore to repeatedly press a button for every trigger squeeze, but it also felt more like you were actually shooting, and it made those tense situations even more frantic. Now you might as well just sellotape the button down and jump everywhere, which is another luxury due to far more floaty physics, allowing you more time to think, shoot, avoid enemies, and notice how much fun you're not having. The weapon upgrades have also been reduced to vague, meaningless levels instead of actual techniques. I have no idea if a level 2 sword is more effective, I barely have to use it. Devil May Cry 1, you had unique abilities to spend your harder earned orbs on, and you had to pick carefully as to what would most benefit your own style of playing. Here you can just get a better version of the same combos you've had the entire game. There is amulet customization, but that firstly involves the same mediocre cutscene every time you find a new ability, rather than the unique cinematic tryouts Dante usually has when acquiring a new weapon. And also, it rather shits over the significance the amulet had in all the other games. This evidently isn't the same amulet, but why would he get a new one? This isn't
the only memento left from the mother you both lost.
So what significance does it have? Remember the finicky, fickle, fixed camera angles? Well, they're back, and unlike the first game where you could at least learn to work around them because of the familiar environments, there's not much backtracking in DMC 2, and having much wider open spaces often leaves you squinting at what is supposedly intense and thrilling gameplay. Some of the bosses spend 90% of the time off-screen, for fuck's sake. And as if auto-fire wasn't bad enough, there's also auto-lock-on. Now that might sound okay in theory, but when you're forced to hit switches in an area full of enemies, you're stuck with either killing them all and hoping they don't infinitely respawn, which they sometimes do, or manipulating the lock-on to try and hit the switch accidentally, which is both infuriating and a clear sign to designers that your game mechanics are broken. You know what's always a good idea? One-hit health bug enemies. You know what else is a good idea? Blurry, headache-inducing fire haze effects in an already difficult-to-see game. You know what else is a good idea? Cheap attacks that either keep you pinned down or immobilise you and take more than half your health. You know what else is a great idea? Nonsensical prompts. The factory has started to collapse. It may explode at any moment, yet I have exactly 12 minutes to escape, and if you don't escape, the place doesn't explode, you just fall down and die. What the So how does this abomination end? Well, you know how some games have a boss battle that's just a copy of all the previous bosses combined into one? Well, DMC2 couldn't even be bothered to hide the fact. It is literally a big steaming lump of all the previous bosses, and 2 from the first game, now inexplicably mute, crushing their personality along with their dignity into dust. What about this game's bosses, I don't hear you ask? Well, there's Joe Cat Gull, Joe Cat Gull, Joe Chocolate Bar, or how about Furia Taurus, like the Pokemon, but more furious. Safe to say, the bosses in DMC2 don't come close to good. In fact, you could say they've got a serious case of the bads. So you kill the big shit of shit bosses and the actual final boss hatches out of it. It's this random man, woman, demon, angel thing that is apparently the despair embodied. This might be more poignant if the story actually contained any despair. Lucia's final boss is at least thematically better in that its Tekken face pumped up on G-Virus or some shit. Ah, a Resident Evil joke, you clever man. No, I'm serious, it could well be. See, Ouroboros is the main enemy in Resident Evil 5. What's it doing in this game? Fucked if I know. mean, it's not like Capcom reuses ideas or anything. But even a possessed and mutated version of Tekken Face still proves nothing to consider breaking a sweat about. Just sleep on the shoot button and jump occasionally. Meanwhile, Dante finishes his thing with this. See, that was a really cool move in Devil May Cry 1, where you could charge your guns with lightning or fire. You can't actually do that in this game, because of the auto-fire. Makes you wonder why they draw attention to it. So Dante's saved the day, but is trapped in the demon world. Ever the optimist, his final words in the game are,
Yeah, let's go all the way to hell.
"But aren't you in hell? What is the demon world if it isn't hell? Is hell like the capital city of the underworld? Also, how did you bring your fucking motorbike with you? Where were you hiding that since you got it in level 3? Devil May Cry 2 is a cringy, rickety, bloody mess of a shambles. But hold your noose fittings, because from the putrid ashes came progress.